Hello, Facebook. How you guys doing today? Like I promised last night, I am back today for another Facebook Live. My plan is to do this at least once a week to bring some type of new piece of information that will speak to the current environment that we're living in, that speaks to the current racial environment that we're living in. And hopefully it will be a blessing to people to give you a little bit more context on how this thing started, what we should do, how we combat it, how we live our lives, what we need to do as a race of people and as a body of Christ and as humanity to overcome racism and prejudice and things of that nature. You know, there are so many people that don't understand it, so many people that don't realize how it all started, so many people don't even think that it exists. So there's a lot of information and misunderstanding about the nature of this phenomenon because it is definitely a phenomenon. And if we're not educated on its origin, if we're not educated on how it exists, on how it works, it's going to be impossible to overcome it. So I want to lead out with this. You know, I want you guys to be encouraged, first of all. It's been a very difficult month and a half for everybody, for not only people of color, but for those who have less color or those without color. Um, it's been tough on everybody, and people have been discouraged. I've been discouraged. It's been a lot for me. You know, I've had quite a few sleepless nights. I know many of you have too. And, you know, the fervor is starting to die down, but, you know, in terms of the protest, in terms of people thinking about it and posting about it and so on and so forth, that as the fervor dies down, their emotions die down, then the action tends to die down first as well. So, in order to be successful, in order to win this, we're going to have to stay vigilant and always stay vigilant and continue to be. But before we can do that, we really have to have an education. We really have to understand how this works and even the origin of it. You know, over the last couple of years, I have been working with the Texas HBCUs. I've been working with 7 or 9 of them, sometimes 8 or 9, but for the most part, seven of 9 of the HBCUs. I've been working with Wiley College. I've been working with Jarvis Christian College. I've been working with Southwestern Christian College out of Terrell, Texas, Texas Southern University, Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas, Baylor University, who has a Center for Oral History, Houston Tillotson University in Austin, Texas, St. Philip's University in San Antonio, Texas. Seems like I'm forgetting one. Southern University Shreveport is a new partner that we're bringing on, and who's going to be a full-fledged partner this year, but because of COVID-19, we weren't able to fully integrate them. But over the next year, we are going to be integrating them. And in working with these universities and their scholars, we have started a program called the HBCU Truth and Reconciliation Oral History Project, which documents racial trauma. It documents the experiences of African Americans and Hispanics with racial discrimination. And then we use the students from all of these HBCUs to come in when we do this huge promotion across the city, the particular city that we're in. And when people come in off the street to tell their story about a time they were racially discriminated against, the students from these HBCUs who've been trained in empathetic listening, empathetic interviewing skills, how to operate the technology, which are the cameras, um, um, where they've been educated in the context of critical race theory. When people come in off the street, these students interview them and take their stories. And when we take those stories, we post them on the internet so we can see the various and myriad of ways in which African Americans are treated on a daily basis. So, since racism is denied so often, since people misunderstand it, since people really don't realize and know how it is transmitted and how it happens on a day to day basis, these stories are actual experiences that prove to the world and show the world how African Americans are treated every day. So, in gathering that information, in running this program for the last, what, this is going on the 5th year actually. You know, we've been recognized internationally by the Ashoka organization, which is an organization that scours the world and finds the most unique ideas and the leading entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs is what they call them in the world. And they found me in this project, which deals with racial trauma. So God has really blessed us, and we've been fortunate to be able to do so well. That project, because of Ashoka organization, made Forbes magazine, and because of that, in September, there's a national magazine who's going to be doing a story on me and the project. We've been interviewing with them for the last 5 months. We just got green lit that this story is going to come out, and the expose will come out in September. And it's about in the national magazine is Christianity Today, which is a magazine that Reverend Billy Graham started back in the 1950s. That's still around today, that has a national readership. And so by being involved with the HBCU Truth and Reconciliation Oral History Project, and if you go to the website and put in the HBCU video, HBCU, dang, I forget it. Just put in the HBCU Oral History Project and it will come up. I forget the tag that we go by online. It's kind of long. So just put in HBCU Oral History Project, or you can put in usclo.com, USCLO.com, and scroll down and you'll see it. Click on it. It will take you to our site. But one of those things that it does, since loved ones with color, loved ones without color, since we really haven't been trained to talk about race. Usually when we do, we get into shouting matches. So one of the things that this program does is it takes the interaction away between people who are ill-equipped to talk about these issues and puts it in a format which is on video, where loved ones without color can watch these videos and in the comfort of their own homes. And instead of being in an environment where the language gets real heated, you can watch this in the comfort of your own home. And then instead of those emotions being anger, those emotions of being are ones of more communication and understanding. So we got to get to a place to where we can talk about this. So in doing this program for the last 5 years, I have discovered something, through talking to many PhDs, through talking to just regular citizens in the United States, doing a lot of reading and just observing. I've come to find out that people don't know how slavery started in the United States. We think we know. We've been taught one thing in our classrooms, in first grade all the way up to our senior year, and even in college. We don't cover the origin of it. We just kind of think we know, and we don't know. But if we are going to defeat this thing, we're going to have to be educated on it. It's going to give us a key insight on what we can do and to understand it. And then you can look back and see, through what I'm getting ready to tell you, that the way in which it started is what we're dealing with now. And in order to defeat it, we're going to have to trace our history all the way back and then start to systematically undo what happened at the very beginning. So here I go. I'm going to tell you a story about how slavery happened in the United States. Okay, this is how it happened. When slavery happened in the United States, it had already been going on for quite a while. In Europe, Europe had just ended it, or were on the cusp of ending it. And Brazil, slavery had been going on in Brazil for a real long time, and it was in its full upswing when our country was founded. So it's pretty natural for that institution to be transferred or exported to our country because it was already in full swing in England and in Brazil. So people were already making money off of it and everything. So our country was founded as a business organization. You got the Massachusetts Bay Company, you got these other companies that were chartered by the king in order to start this country. So it was a business transaction by these different companies to come into the United States and start a country in order to make money. So when the founding colonists got here in 1619, um, there were crops that had to be planted, there were crops that had to be harvested, and there were crops that had to be eaten and then exported to the other countries in order to make money. And the particular crop in the United States was cotton. And in order for that crop to be harvested and sold online, it needed workers. So the very first workers that those colonists imported over to the country, they were what you call indentured servants. I know many of us have heard the term indentured servants, and the education that you got from your elementary school about indentured servants is right, but they just didn't go far enough. So the indentured servants were not only black, but they were white as well. So there were white indentured servants and there were also black indentured servants, and they were each given a term of 7 years of service that you had to complete in order to complete your indentured servanthood. So at the end of 7 years, there was a contract that was signed between the planners and the indentured servants that at the end of 7 years, when you complete your contract, that you would be given a plot of land. You could become a planner. You could become an industrialist. You could become a part of the gentry class. But throughout time from 1619 to 1630, 1640, and 50, throughout that time, the planters and the industrial class ended up buying all of the land along the eastern seaboard. So when the indentured servants, both black and white, finished their contracts, when it came time for them to be awarded their land, there was no land left because all of the planters had bought up all the land and frankly did not intend on giving them the land. Okay, so we got white indentured servants and then we have black indentured servants. So both at the end of their term came up with nothing. So what happened was the white indentured servants and the black indentured servants got together and formed a militia, and they started rebelling against the colonists and the planters and the industrialists on the eastern seaboard, and they started a rebellion. And the name of this rebellion is Bacon's Rebellion. So if you want to go read further about this, it's Bacon's Rebellion. So there was a rebellion by the indentured servants, both black and white, to take over their land, to get their land to receive their actual reward that they were promised when they signed their contract of indentured servanthood. So after that, the industrialists, the colonists, the planters all got together and formed a pact. They made an agreement. They went to the white indentured servants and told them, they said, if you do two things, we will give you your land and you can become one of us, an industrialist, a planter, a colonist. And so what they said was, if you become part of the military, which is the militia, and if you become a part of the police force, we will give you your land. If you became part of the military, your job was to put down other rebellions by other indentured servants. If you became part of the military, well, actually, you had to do both. If you became a part of the police force, your job was to monitor indentured servants. So the white indentured servants was offered military service and police service. The military service was to put down potential rebellions, and the police was to monitor indentured servants at this particular time. But it's quickly going to change, okay? So the planners offered the white indentured servants military service, police service, but then it went to the black indentured servants, and instead of offering them anything, they increased their 7 years of indentured servanthood to life. So they changed them from indentured servants to slaves with the stroke of a pen. Okay. And the white indentured servants were now watching over their fellow indentured servants. So they became the people who monitored their former comrades, their slaves, their former comrades who are now slaves. And now they're in the military and they are in the police. So if you look at today's police forces, all right, it is consistent now with how it was created back during the colonist days. Okay, so we're having brutality out of policemen. We're having driving while black. We're having these prying eyes, these watchful eyes, always watching people who have black and brown bodies for years. But if you know anything about your history, This has been going on for years. It is not new. This has been going on for years. They were created to keep their eyes on black and brown bodies. So in order to fix this, we're going to have to go all the way back to our history. We're going to have to go all the way back to our education and find out what happened, why they were created to be police, and then use that information to systematically undo what's been going on. So, there are going to be many legislators, there are going to be many policymakers who are going to be looking at this question, who are going to be coming up with some of the ways in which we can fix this and reform this system that was created out of slavery. So, again, the white indentured servants were offered military service and police service to watch over their former comrades who are now slaves, whose terms of service has been lengthened to life. And I want to tell you another piece of information that also informs what's going on now. Okay. This is very, very, very important. This is very important. And many people knew this. Martin Luther King Jr. knew this. The abolitionists knew this. Everybody knows, but we have to know this. Okay. Now, in my work, I've been doing this for 11 years. Okay. And in my 11 years, I have noticed a whole bunch of things, but I'm going to talk about two of them right now. First, I've noticed that, racism is a very, very bad cancer in our society. It's terrible and it's a huge problem. But in my work, I've discovered that it's not the worst problem. Okay. The worst problem that I've discovered about racism is that the people who are most affected by racism have accepted it, which means when things like this occur, we protest, we make internet posts, we talk about it, we get angry, but we never move to a position of organization and mobilization. Okay. So, in order to defeat racism, systemic racism, we can no longer just sit back. We can no longer, protest about it or do internet posts about it or be simply angry about it. You have to take that anger, you have to take that righteous indignation. I'm going to give you a definition for what anger is. There's a theologian by the name of James Cone who says the definition of anger, which is a righteous definition. Okay, if you don't turn it to violence, which is a righteous definition. He says the definition of anger lets you know that something is wrong with the relationship. That is what that emotion does. It lets you know that something is wrong in the relationship, which signals that there was a relationship. And on top of that, the word reconciliation, which is a beautiful word to me, confirms that the word reconciliation means, and I'm blanking on it, it means to become friends again. That's what it means, to become friends again. And that's a beautiful word because it also implies that there was once a relationship. And if we know anything about Jesus Christ, and at the beginning, we were all friends, but something happened in there. The friendships were frayed and they're disconnected. So, in order for us to repair those friendships, we're going to have Jesus Christ in order to repair those friendships, and then lots and lots of education. So, it's important that we take that righteous indignation, that anger, that emotion that lets us know that something is wrong in a relationship. And we have to go from just yelling and screaming and moaning about it. We have to move to a place of mobilization. We have to move to a place of organization. We have to organize all around the country, all around the world in order for this to be successful. And reason why it took so long up until 1950s and 1960s for us to finally win and be successful at this thing is because Martin Luther King Jr. and SNCC and many of these other organizations got together and organized, and they organized as a unit. The big six came together and they started fighting racism as a team. And that's what we're going to have to do. All the disparate organizations out there who are doing good work, we have to come together as one unit, as one team, and fight this together with a single-minded plan. And Martin Luther King Jr. had it right. He took all those organizations and he used Southern Christian Leadership Conference as an umbrella organization to take and receive and to coordinate all of these other actions by the students and things of that nature, and other local organizers. They all worked together and had teams together and took direction from MLK and SCLC. And he had it right with the church being the leader. of this. And my organization, which is called US-CLO, the United States Christian Leadership Organization, and I'm going to admit it, I copied. I copied MLK as close as I could without copying him directly. And it's named United States Christian Leadership Organization off of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, okay? Because he recognized, and I also recognize, that it's going to take Jesus Christ in order to do this. It's going to take the church to do this. And what MLK did with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and other pastors around the country, they got together and they formed that organization, which organized and mobilized and utilized the church to defeat racial discrimination in our country. And then after MLK was killed, it disintegrated, and all the churches just kind of went along and started doing one-off things or nothing at all. So what I'm trying to say is this, and I'm going to give you the historical proof of it here in just a second. Okay, the church has punted on its responsibility of being the solver of racial discrimination. They have punted. They have not been ever since MLK was killed. They have abdicated their responsibility. And in order for the church, and in order for us to defeat racism, the church is going to have to be mobilized again. And my organization's primary aim is to mobilize the church and to organize the church in very simple ways. And we come up with a very effective, a very powerful, and a very simple model that all churches can do, can join in, and we can be one big unit in your locality, one big unit in your state, one big unit in the country, that we can all come together and work and educate policymakers and begin to pass legislation that will begin to stem the tide of what's happening in the country. And not only we're going to be targeting legislation, educating on legislation, trying to organize people along those lines so we can change legislation. We also have a proclamation piece where pastors are going to be coming together, and we're going to have gatherings, huge gatherings across the country, where people are going to come together in one accord. People are going to come together with Jesus Christ on their mind. And we're going to hold the institution of racism up in the light of Jesus Christ. And we're going to speak to it, and we're going to speak to it directly. And we're going to offer an alternative to what's out there. So to back up, I'm going to give you the historical underpinning for why churches have have been on the sideline of this game for many years. And I'm very sad because it doesn't speak to the faith in Jesus Christ, the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, and how we as pastors are supposed to live into the faith and speak prophetically to the world, and we haven't been. And it's time that we do. And I have invented a model taken largely off of what MLK did, dusted it off, made it shiny and new again. We're going to represent it to the world in a way that people will feel comfortable being involved or getting involved. But when you go back to 1619, between 1619, 1650, all the way up to the 1700s, you will find that when the fathers took those indentured servants, those white indentured servants, gave them their land, separated the fight, the unity that the black and white indentured servants had when they fought in Bacon's rebellion, when they took them and separated them and gave them their land in exchange for military service and in exchange for being the police force to watch over their former comrades, to make sure that they're not rebelling, to keep an eye on them, to make sure they're doing their work every day. There was a reaction from the church. There was an immediate reaction from the church. All right. The church tried to step in and stop it. The church tried to step in and stop it. And when the church tried to step in and stop slavery and what was happening at that particular moment, okay, the planners, through their legislators, through their politicians, got together and told the church that we're going to revoke your license if you try to stop this institution. And that created fear within the church. The church went underground, and they have been silent ever since. That's the historical underpinning of why the church is silent now. They've been told by the politicians. They've been told by those in governmental authority that if you work in this way, we're going to come after you. They've always made it uncomfortable. The 501c3 laws is one such mechanism that silences churches, okay? And so this has been part and parcel from the very beginning. This is one of the reasons why pastors are fearful of working. This is one of the reasons why churches are fearful of getting involved, because from the very beginning, the legislators, the legislation, the public policies have worked against Christianity, have worked against what we instinctively know to be a loving and righteous organization. It worked to keep them underneath their thumb. And that's the historical underpinning. And in order for us to defeat racism, we got to know that. Okay. We got to know that. And it's very important that we do. It's very important that churches come together, because we are, when there's division and when there's hate, when there's killing, when there's violence, the church is the natural organization that God created to bring love, peace, and compassion and understanding and potential discussion to a particular reality, to a particular issue. We're called to do that, but we're hamstrung by these laws. We're hamstrung by government. We're hamstrung by our own congregations. And I'm just asking the church to raise up, rise up. Don't be hamstrung by these organizations. Have faith in this entity that we call God, that we call Jesus Christ, that He's going to protect us. To not get involved is to believe that God is not going to protect us, and that's just not consistent with what we know Christianity to be. It's not consistent with being a pastor. It's not consistent with being a reverend. We're supposed to have faith. We're supposed to live into the gospel. We're supposed to be the prophetic voice to the world when the world is lost, when the world is going down the wrong way. We're supposed to be that voice, and we have been. And when the church, if you look back in history, when the church has been silent, some of the most evil things have taken place in history: slavery, Jim Crow, the Holocaust, what the Germans did to the Jews. The church sat down, and those organizations were able to rise. And in order for those organizations, those evil institutions to rise, they hamstrung. I mean, Hitler hamstrung the religious community in Germany. Okay, but then when you look back, when these same institutions were vanquished, there was this remnant. God always does things by remnants. I'm gonna have a talk with Him about it, God, about that when we get in heaven. I'm gonna say, Lord, why always a remnant? Just a few people. But God takes a remnant. He took a remnant of the church. He took the abolitionists. He took the abolitionists, and He used those abolitionists to vanquish slavery. But if you read, there's this book that's called "When Slavery Was Called Freedom." You read this book and you do your history lessons, you will find very quickly that it was the religious establishment, it was the preachers that marched us down the road to the Civil War. It was the preachers, it was the clergy, it was the ecclesiastic community that took us to war. And one of the reasons they took us to war is because it's how they looked at slavery, right? There's a thought in history that if you were a slave owner, and if you were successful, which many were, the country was successful because of slavery, then it must be sanctioned by God because you're being successful at it. And so the ministers, when the abolitionists, the religious abolitionists, drummed up and started to fight against slavery, there was a direct theological and philosophical confrontation between the two. And the reason why the church took us down and marched us down the road to the Civil War was because they wanted to prove that slavery was sanctioned by God. And if the South won, that was definite proof that God was definitely in control and supported and sanctioned slavery. That was their theological underpinning. They needed to go to war and they needed to win in order for slavery to be sanctioned. Okay. Again, my question is, what was going on spiritually with those preachers in order for them to even think that in the first place? Spiritually, you have to be in a dark place spiritually in order to think that. And there's this word called presentism that you may begin to hear as you study these issues. We have to go back and read. We really do. There's a word called presentism, which means that you can't apply today's standards to yesterday's institutions and traditions. Okay, people will say now, it's readily thought and understood that slavery was wrong. So people are saying, historians say, philosophers say, the academics say that we can't apply today's standards to the thought of what was right back from 1619 to 1865. And my response to presentism is this, and I'm gonna give a religious response because I'm a preacher and that's what I know. The Bible was written Jesus Christ died 2,000 years ago. They completed the Bible around that time. So the Bible's been around for 2,000 years, and the Old Testament has been around for thousands of years. So what's right or what's wrong has been written in the Bible for years. So you can yeah, what's in the spirit of man. I mean, the instinct of a man tells you by taking somebody as a slave and raping and killing and kidnapping and holding them in bondage. Your instincts, your humanity tells you that that's wrong. But the Bible that's been around for thousands of years also tells you that wrong. That's wrong. But what was happening was the people who invented slavery, especially in the West, we're dealing with United States. They ignored the Bible. The Bible was always speaking to them about this being wrong. The abolitionist was always speaking to them about this being wrong. It's not being dissonant and in accord with the Bible. So the term of presentation, when you hold it up in theological terms, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the Bible has always been telling us it was wrong. So we can do away with that term. So when you see the word presentism, hold it up in the light of the gospel and say, hey, the gospel had been here for years telling you it was wrong. Okay. So the abolitionists, you know, were direct competitors to the preachers who were marching us down to war during the Civil War, right before the Civil War. They were a direct voice against them. So the church rose up, that remnant again, that remnant, they were successful. Okay. You go to Nazi Germany, there was a remnant of people that rose up that helped to get rid of Hitler. There's one particular theologian that I want you guys to look up. His name is Bonhoeffer. I can't think of what his first name is, but if you look him up, Google, excuse me, his name is Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was a famous theologian in Germany at the Confessing Church. When Hitler came into power, he feared for his life and he fled to the United States. He stayed there for a while, but while he was there, he started saying, discipleship, to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, it's costly. We have to give our lives sometimes for our brother. Many times, all the time, we have to give our lives for our brothers. And Mr. Bonhoeffer, he left New York and he went back to Germany to fight against Germany and Hitler and that regime via the gospel, knowing full well that if he fought with the gospel against Hitler and his regime, knowing full well that at some point he was going to hear a knock at the door. And 2 to 3 weeks before the war was over, when Germany was losing and the Soviet Union was knocking at its door and the United States with D-Day was on its way, Reverend Bonhoeffer heard that knock at the door. He walked to the door. German Gestapo SS, they were waiting for him. He knew it was going to come, but he was brave and he took that step anyway. He came back home and he fought, and knock on the door came. They took him. He went willingly, and they hung him. They killed him. That's the church rising up, and they were vanquished. That's the church rising up. And then in the 1960s, we had Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and SCLC. We had SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We had CORE. They had all these organizations that came together to work together, to mobilize and organize together under the umbrella and directing of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. with a Christian theme. He organized people. And he did that through the church. Now, here's his remnant again. There's a theologian by the name of Day. I can't think of her first name, Dr. Day. She's a Princeton theologian. And she wrote about the church involvement in the civil rights movement. When you look back in the 1960s, the church was so prevalent, the church was so powerful that it gave the impression that all churches were participating in the civil rights movement, and they weren't. Carrie Day is her name, Dr. Carrie Day, Kerri of Princeton University, very smart lady, super duper intelligent. And she wrote a book, I think it's called Unfinished Business, and there's enough for it. If you put in Unfinished Business, Carrie Day, it should come up. And she writes about only 13% of the actual churches being involved in the civil rights movement. Only 13%. It seems like 100%, but it was only 13%. but they were powerful. That's that remnant. God works in remnants. Even when the even when the Hebrews were sent to off into exile, God told them, I'm going to save a remnant. And God's always been working with these remnants, and I want to have a talk with God about that. I'm like, God, I want to have more than a remnant. I'd like to at least double the 13% participation to 26% of the church, at least 26%. You know, if we're going to defeat this thing, I'd like to see us be more of a remnant. I'd like to see churches um, um, push back on what the politicians have tried to prescribe to us by offering to suspend our license, by 501c3 laws, all of these things to keep the church hamstrung. And we need to push back against those, and we need to organize, and we need to work together to pass public policy that stops some of this unwanted behavior and that benefits people of color. It's time out for us to quit being divided. The Bible says that none of us will see heaven if we don't live in peace. And so we have to believe that none of us will. The house divided against itself will fall. We have to believe these things. So at some point, we have to start living into our love. We have to live into our love, and we have to live into our courage. I want men and women to be courageous out there. In order for us to beat this, we're going to have to become involved. We're going to have to become active. If you're not doing anything, I'm talking to you. If you're not doing anything. I can't tell you if you're not doing it. If you're not engaged in some local community, now check this out, not charity. I'm not talking about feeding the hungry. I'm not talking about, school lunch programs. I'm not talking about backpack program. I'm not talking about missions. I'm not talking about these are all charity acts. And I'm not saying charity is bad. Charity is good. But there's another side to charity. Charity is treating symptoms. If you feed somebody in 4 hours, they're going to be hungry again. If you give somebody clothes in a year or two, those clothes will wear out. You're gonna have to give them those clothes again. You know, if you try to get somebody in temporary housing when that housing is no longer available, they're going to need housing again. So charity is treating the symptom. It's not treating the underlying cause of what the symptoms are. We have to get involved in justice work. So I want to be key about this. I want to be key about this. You know, Charity work is not justice work. Charity does not distinguish, extinguish, I should say, racism. It allows you to live in the system better, is what it does, but it doesn't extinguish it. So if we're going to live fuller lives, we got to destroy it. We got to rid ourselves of racism, and what that is, that's justice work. Justice work fixes the underlying cause of the symptom. Okay, so we have to get involved in things that fix that system. Legislation, changing hearts. Those are the two things that fix the underlying causes of hunger, the underlying causes of housing, the underlying causes of educational, lack of educational opportunities. We have to fix those things, and you fix those things through passing public policy of which I am asking the church to be more involved in. Get involved in US-CLO, the United States Christian Leadership Organization. We have a national initiative we're going throughout the whole country to organize churches in a way that's very simple, in a way that you can do it straight from your cell phone and from your computers at home. Okay, we're forming partnerships with legislators. We're forming partnerships with religious organizations all throughout the country to do this. And you never have to leave your home to do it. You don't have to be afraid. Your employers won't find out. You just have to expend a little energy. It's going to take sacrifice from all of us. So talk to your pastors. If you're a pastor, please give me a call. If you are not a pastor, have a conversation with your pastor about joining this network. It's going to be it is a very powerful network that's going to be linked throughout the whole country to where we can begin to make a true dent in this thing and eventually eradicate it. We are going to eradicate it. So I want you to know that right now, because I've dedicated my life to eradicating it. And I believe I walk with God. I believe God walks with me. And that is one of my prayers. And I'm fully expecting God to honor that prayer. So thank all of you for tuning in today to my history lesson. Next week, I will be thinking about asking God to lead me in what I should talk about next week, and which will give you some context, more insight on how we defeat this thing. So until then, God bless and see you later. Bye.